Hi, I'm Jane Harvey and I'm a TTouch practitioner. One of the most important things that we do when we're working with dogs is first of all to make an observation of them as best we can. So when I'm observing a dog, I'm looking for how they're carrying their weight, if they're visibly a little stiff, how their tail hangs, whether it's tight, cupped under them, high, their carriage of their ears, all sorts of things. When you're looking at your dog, be very aware of how they react to being touched. Look also for changes in coat patterns. When a dog carries tension in their bodies, hair follicles can be pulled, which swirl or change the direction dramatically all of a sudden of how the coat lies. So we're looking for changes in coat. We're looking for if they are walking, bearing weight one side, if they're a little stiff in the front legs, stiff in the back. Swirling fur can be indicative of tension. So I'm just looking at Otis's coat pattern, and there is a specific change in coat pattern there. Might be indicative of a little tension going down the back. We all carry tension in our bodies, so it doesn't mean anything major is wrong, it's just something to note. He is quite swirly around the base of his tail, and often when there is tension in the body, hair follicles are pulled and distorted in terms of how the coat sits. If it's a constant pattern, it may just simply be how his fur grows, but if you've got, Otis, come on darling, if you've got a sudden change, so you've got a really smooth area and then you get a sudden swirl, it's just worth noting that. It may not be that there's tension there, but if we note a change of coat, a swirl of fur, we do work in that area and that softens and lies in the same path as the other surrounding fur, then it may well be that that's been a tension spot. So it's just making observations about coat changes so that if they change, we've got a benchmark to start from. And when he was younger, he had a little bit of, not dysplasia, but one of his hips didn't develop properly. And also, a lot of dogs carry tension around their back end because it's the engine that drives them. You see, then he moved then. So I'm aware that that might be a little uncomfortable, so I'm not going to keep going over that spot. He does tend to reverse in for a bottom session, but equally, I tend to dip in and out of the bottom area and then come back to where he's more comfortable. You can often also assess tension by feeling the tautness of the skin. So where the skin moves more freely, there's probably a lot less tension. Where it's tight around the back end, often you'll be able to detect. The other way of possible indicators of tension, good boy Otis, is hot and cold spots. So when we're observing our dogs, before we actually do any TTouch at all, the first thing we do, use the back of our hand to do a flat hand exploration. I've already done one on Otis, here's one I made earlier. But by using, and there's a nice little calming signal there, he's just yawned. By using the back of my hand, I'm assessing to see if there's any temperature changes. Hot or cold spot can be, not always, but can be indicative of tension. If they've been lying in the sun, we have to make sure it's in context and we don't make wrong assessments, but it's just worth noting. It's not a critique, it's not about saying that dog has something wrong there, it's about just noting whether a swirl on the side of a dog that is suddenly visible changes and softens, because when I've worked with dogs I have seen those changes. I've seen coat patterns that have softened from what seemed a very obvious change in pattern, a swirl, become a smoothed over area from intense bodywork session. So it's simply making an observation about how your dog carries themselves, as detailed as you can, in order to look back and see if that changes in any way. So if you are doing some TTouch work on your dog and they flinch, a little like Otis did when I was working around his back end, a little bit of a head turn or a move away would suggest that they're not very comfortable. So what we do is immediately acknowledge that. The T of TTouch, don't forget, stands for trust. So we want to gain their trust. We would immediately move away from that area and work on an area that you know they're happy with. So if a dog is uncomfortable, indicates an uncomfortableness around one area, we'd move back to an area that we've worked on before and known that they like. But we don't leave it at that. We keep dipping into areas where we feel that there is potentially tension, with a view to increasing the amount of time we're spending on that area. But we don't want to do TTouch to them whether they like it or not. So we're building up that trust. We're working areas that they're happy with, building up to increase working with areas that they're less happy with. We do need to push them a little out of their comfort zone, otherwise we won't make changes, but we do need to make sure we do so respectfully and in their own time. It's much better to do lots of little short sessions than to do one great big long session with a view to major changes. So little and often is definitely key. When we're working our dogs, we're constantly observing calming signals. Calming signals are something that dogs give off to calm them and you down and all around them, and to give messages of appeasement. Sometimes you have to be careful they're not giving you a message that they're uncomfortable. One of the difficulties is if you're working, as I am now, I can't actually see what she's doing, but I'm trying to watch to see if she's yawning, licking her lips. She's looking fairly relaxed at the moment. We're wanting to read a happy, relaxed dog, but if any time we feel that they're not, then we need to just give them a few minutes just to stop. Again, when we're reading facial expressions, we're looking for tightness, which could be indicative of fear. We don't want to push a dog out of their comfort zone. If the commissure, the side of the mouth, suddenly starts to tighten, we want to make sure we're not in the line of fire for a bite, because obviously if a dog is uncomfortable and we don't heed their messages or warnings, how else are they going to communicate to us? So it's very important to ensure that they're comfortable at all times and that we're going at their pace and not pushing them too far out of their comfort zone. When Libby first came into the room, she was, I think, quite nervous. She was clamping her tail quite strictly underneath her. She does seem to have relaxed a little bit now, but I would do a little bit of work around the base of the tail. We do carry a lot of tension in that area. Tails tend to not move in non-habitual ways, so we want them to release tension. But she does rather like, she's a bit of a cuddle monster, aren't you? So it's a case of just observing that, the feeling of looseness that a tail acquires when a dog is a little more relaxed, and it's certainly a little bit more. We're certainly more relaxed now. Oh, and a nice little breath there just to say it's bedtime. And that was just a couple of minutes of TTouch, wasn't it? Eh? So she's done really well, because she was quite nervous when she came in, and she is only a baby. But you see, I'm constantly doing little touches on her. What in your hair? So we're looking for changes in the coat, which may be indicative of tension. I'm using the back of my hand just to assess if there's any hot or cold spots. I am feeling a little bit of a hot spot just over the hip there, which may be because she's been lying on that side, or it may be a tension spot. Swirls occur sometimes simply because they do. It doesn't always mean there is tension there, but if we don't make an observation about how a coat is when we first start to work with our dogs, we're not going to notice significant changes. So that's why we simply make those observations, so that we can see if there has been any change. And if we notice an area that has suddenly swirled out, changed, then we know that perhaps the work we've done has changed that posture, and therefore the swirl. You are beautiful, aren't you? So I'm using the back of my hand, starting to do a flat hand exploration. It can sort of turn into a TTouch too, because you can do what's called a Llama Touch, which is using the back of the hand because it's more sensitive. That's why we use the back of a hand. That's why we test babies' milk bottles on the back of our hand. It's more sensitive, but that can then evolve into a little touch as we go. There's a lot of swirls going on here, down the back of her leg. Obviously you've got very nice, beautiful wavy fur, which is going to be in some ways harder to read. A really short-coated dog is often easier to read because the change of coat is there to see. She's got swirls going down her leg, but I think that's just how her fur sits. I wouldn't know for sure, but it is just worth noting all these textures and changes. If an area of fur feels a little bit more rough compared to another area that's softer, we're looking for changes in shine, in texture, anything that differs from another section of the body, some of which may simply be how she is, and some may be an indicator that we can look out for and just keep an eye on and note. So it's just interesting to observe a very distinct coat pattern change there. That may be because she's been lying, this is Lady, been lying on that hip, or it could be a very clear indicator of tension. So I'm just feeling down that area to see if there's any hot or cold changes noticeable. There isn't particularly. She's got another little swirl down the back there, which again isn't replicated there. So it's about looking if it's symmetrical or if it's a random one. I would certainly flag that up as a spot that may or may not soften with a little bit of bodywork around that bottom.